Okay, so Jennifer,
Yes.
we're going to do a quick attendance here. We've got looks like 6 participants, including those on the phone. I like the fact that it shows people on the phone and people that have come in on the computer. So Barb Haney, Aaron, Holly Teague, Jennifer, Mary, and Lester are on the call. So Barbara Haney, did I say Barbara Haney? Yes. Um, and I think that this is, in some respects, I did get some emails from people that at the last minute weren't able to make it, which is why I had hoped that we could record it so that other people could listen to it if they want to listen to it. But I will recap it at the end also. And basically, we're following the agenda, which I said, we'll talk about the transition, what's going to happen and when it's going to happen. We'll talk about what happened in fiscal year 15. We'll talk about some of the key foci that are on the table for fiscal year 16 and beyond. And then we'll talk a little bit about making sure that we've got at least the people that are here on the call are able to select what it is that they think they want to work on as part of the committee in the next year. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So Jennifer,
Yes.
share your wisdom from the last couple of years.
Well, right.
Talk a little bit about what you think the things are that have happened in the last year or two since you've been involved, because you were involved as chair-elect, and what you would like to see moving forward, and a little bit about what you see as everything leading forward into, I guess.
Right. I think the things that I've seen, I guess, in the past few years that I guess I've really come to understand or appreciate better this year is that there is a lot of collection of we're trying to or attempting to collect some information, but I don't know that we're doing it that well, and I don't know that we're using it that wisely. And I think it's just because we started out with this maybe small, and then it kind of just got away from us. Maybe, I mean, we're at the point where we're, already this year we've, at my last numbers at the beginning of May, we've, are close to giving away, $125,000, and our goal for this year was, $150,000, which is up $50,000 from last year, which we were able to meet. So, we keep giving away all this money, we keep getting all these proposals, and it's just, okay, we've got so many, we've got, over 50 grants, maybe over 80 grants that we're funding, some we don't fund, and it's just a volunteer basis that we're trying to collect all this data, but maybe we're collecting too much, maybe we're not collecting the right data, and it's just getting away from us. So I think that's really the biggest thing that I've come to appreciate this year, doing some of the closeout reporting, that maybe the committee doesn't see some of that or hasn't seen some of that really until this year up front, because it was really just being handled by a couple people, which really got to be too much for just a couple people to handle. So it really needs to be done by more than just a couple people, and we're still trying to figure out how to make that work, I guess, the best way and delegate that the best way, I think.
I think that's
the data. Could you kind of like, we're spending too much time collecting statistics on the proposals? Is that?
I don't think that's what I heard. I think what I heard was that there may be a lot of data that we're collecting that we may or may not need. I mean,
Right.
Oh, I see.
we
Okay.
talk about that all the time, about how much
Mhm.
information we are collecting during the process of the review and the closeout, that are we ever going to use this? Is it really relevant? And are there places where we can start to streamline it a little bit better and say, we don't really need that information? By the
Exactly.
way, welcome, Nancy.
I mean, because we collect, we divvy out this stuff, all day long into like 50 million different ways. But when we really look it down to, some of the requests we even have internally, or we have very few requests I say internally within the PDG committee, and then externally from other SWE committees, of what they're asking for, and they're basically asking, well, how many grants did you have, outreach or professional development, or within how many, and within which region? And
Right.
for, it's not all of this, how many girls did you touch, or how many volunteers were per event, and all of this extra stuff that we're collecting.
Now, I will say
Okay.
that I do believe that collecting some data will help you determine what your parameters are for operating. So knowing, for instance, that of the last 25 proposals, the average cost for t-shirts was X, or the average cost of food was X, so that you can come up with some parameter that you can help people understand whether they're in the ballpark or not when they submit a further request. I don't think we do a real good job of looking at that data. I think the majority of the data that we're looking at is
And
a much higher level.
That goes back to, so what data are we collecting, and is what we're collecting effective, or are there pieces that we're not collecting? Because if you look at those closeout reports and the data that we're entering, we're not collecting how much t-shirts are costing. I mean, we have to go back through and sort through several and say, okay, well, we're averaging, $8 a t-shirt right now over the last, 10 grants or so. We're not collecting that data. We're collecting, how many volunteer hours per girl or something, which may be a relevant thing. I mean, we've had that discussion on the international level of, maybe we can find some volunteer per girl per event kind of metric. But, I mean, we're collecting several different data points, but maybe all those data points aren't valid, and maybe there are data points that we're not collecting that need to be collected.
And so I think that's, that, as I mentioned to several of you, is really going to be my focus and my time, is to look at the whole process and say, where can we eliminate some of that data that we're asking for? What do we really need, and how can we go about doing that best? And so I think what I hear from you, Jennifer, is that over the last couple of years, we're definitely transitioning to a data-driven organization, whether we like it or not. It's going there. Unfortunately, we don't have the tools in place to support that easily. So everything that we do ends up having to be data pulled from someplace else and put into our databases and our sources of data. And so I think that piece of it, there's people much smarter than us that are already thinking about how to work on that. We just need to capitalize on all that work that they're doing.
Right. And we have Excel sheets all over in Google Docs and Dropbox, and like, I mentioned with the closeout reports, it got too big to be just one or two people handling those closeout reports, and we've tried to move it to so that it's more than one person looking at those now, and we're still kind of fumbling with that equation on how best to do that. But all of this reviews and data entry is going to get to a point, especially as we start seeing more international grants, it's going to get to a point where we're going to have to look at maybe, some kind of web-based application for the grants.
Yeah. And there are plenty of those out there. People do grants. Big and little companies are doing grants and processing grants, and so they have lots of software out there that enables you to do that. It may not be exactly what we're looking for, but I think, you know, having the ability and knowing that at the society level that there is a focus on how do we consolidate these efforts and make it simpler for members who have to do the evaluation of things like awards and things like grants. And that's really what we're striving for, and what my focus is going to be. How do we make it easier for people to submit applications, and then how do we make it easier for members like you guys who have to help with the evaluation to get that evaluation done, so that we maximize your time and effort on this. We're not talking big bucks here. If you look at what we're talking about, it's under $200,000 that was requested, and like you said, we're like around $125,000 already to year to date that we've awarded, and it looks like 2/3 of that is professional, and 1/3 of it is collegiates that we've awarded it to. The thing of note here to me, and the thing of interest to me, we've instituted a pre-review process, and where we manage it a little bit better, and we've also instituted a closeout review process. And I think of interest to me is if you look at that 93 number that I have there, that's really actually 81. 81 unique proposals were submitted, but we had to re-review 12 of those. So we had to re-review almost 15% of them, because
Wow, Mary. I reworked.
either we missed something in the pre-review, or we don't have clearly defined guidelines to help people submit the correct pieces of information. Or people aren't reading it, and therefore they're able to submit whatever they want because it's just a Word document. So if we could, in some ways, institute a way to say, time out, we have to get rid of this rework. This is the piece that we have to, this is what takes our time and sucks our time, because we've had to review that twice and spend significant resources on making sure that we have the correct information. And some of that's due to complexity, and some of it is due to just the process not being tight enough and not preventing garbage from coming in. And instead we get a lot of stuff that you look at and you go, wow, they want money? Okay. I think there's no surprises in the data here when you look at which regions are doing what. Big region, Region H, is doing the majority. Region D is another big region. I was actually surprised to see Region A, because I didn't think they did anything this year. Something quite of interest to me is that if you think about membership, I don't know exactly how many people are in Region H, but I want to say it's 2,000 members maybe in Region A or more. You look at international, and there's less than 1,000, is probably less than 800 people in international. Yet, and if I look at Region C, I know Region C probably has at least 1,000, 1,200 people in it. Yet they ended up getting less money than the international projects did, mainly because they're just not submitting. They're not requesting it. Is there anything else on these charts that anybody has any comments on? I mean, what I would like to be able to do is look at adding the data in here that talks about closeout. Looking at some things for how long does it take to close out a proposal?
Oh my
Because
gosh.
if you're running into Jennifer, you know, if you look at the, Lester, where's the other timeline, the picture that I put together based on the ping file?
They're all here.
All timeline, there you go. So if you look at this timeline, you know, I get very vague when I get out into closeout cycle begins. It's just like, well, okay.
I'm going to tell you right now that X30, we do get a lot of late reports.
Okay.
But
if we can put in, and have that be something that sets up a notification and starts annoying the bejesus out of them because they have late reports.
Right. And it was interesting, this first half of this year, I did send some people, like, I added their closeout report date to the Google Calendar so it would send them an email. I think for the most part, those people sent their reports close to on time, but then the second half of the year, I didn't do that. So
well, and so I guess my point is that if we can set it up so that that's kind of taken care of systematically, that eliminates that.
Mary,
yes.
I think a really great vision for this would be that we have a system that makes the upfront simple, that makes it really simple and easy to close on the final report, and that information sets those activities up to be recognized with awards, all with the same data set, all with the same application.
So if you satisfy this criteria, whatever the criteria is that we set up for participating in PDG, then the issue is that what do we do at the end if somebody doesn't provide a satisfactory report, do we, where's the blacklist they go on?
Well, right now they're not getting blacklisted. That's part of the problem. But I mean, a lot of times if they don't submit a satisfactory report, usually it's like they didn't submit their budget in the correct format, and like you're trying to make heads or tails of what they put in there, and you're like, I'm not messing with this. Send me the correct budget in the correct format so that I can read this.
Right. And so that creates the delay to the final report.
Correct.
Right.
Lately it's been receipts. I've been asking for receipts. That's a new thing.
That's new.
That's new. So
what's
the number of grants with bad budgets on the final report is amazing. They're obviously not looking at the information online.
Okay, so, I mean, we haven't even dug into what is causing the problems with the closeout reports, and I'm sure if we got into some of the details, it's all stuff that we should be able to resolve.
People can't do a budget?
Well, by taking that responsibility away from them and just asking them for information, letting the system do the budget calculations, and don't let them get past point A if they don't have the information.
Okay. I mean, I think we've got a lot of clear things to work on in the next year on how to make this better than it is today.
But I think part of the issue that you always have, and the Finance Committee ran into this many years ago when they had FAQs that they were operating by. And they had to make it into a procedure because now we're talking about money. And money becomes open to all kinds of oversight, much more so than anything else. Maybe legal a little bit. But so I think anytime you have anything to do with money, you need to have even a greater sense of stewardship, especially if it's donated money you're dealing with. And I just find that that's that we sometimes end up losing sight of that because we get so freaking mired down in the details, in the nitty-gritty of it, and knowing that, we have to be accountable for X, Y, and Z. I think if we define what it is and make sure that whatever the criteria is equitable to everybody. And by equitable, I don't mean the same. I mean equitable. So if we're talking about international and domestic, it's equitable. And that can be interpreted many ways.
Right. But to your point, Mary, if someone has a bad event, whether it's like over budget or underattended or something like that, we may question it when we send their closeout, details, whether they owe us money or we owe them money. Usually they owe us money if something like that happens.
We
We question it, but we don't put them on a list saying
Right.
we won't going to fund your
Right.
event in the future.
Right. We don't give them a score that says, okay, when we go to, it's almost like a FICO score or a FICO
Right.
score. where
FICO
you say,
score.
all
You
right,
would need to develop some kind of criteria to give each
it's
event
a PDG
kind of,
score. Right.
FICO score kind of rating and say, okay, your event scored, a 400, and because you didn't meet, a good, a good event score rating, we will not fund this event in the future.
I like that. There has to, and that has to be fairly easy to put together.
Well, yeah, I mean, you could base it on over budget, attendance, and, just a couple factors.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Who's talking right now? Is it Jennifer?
I
Yeah.
was just going to add that, Jennifer, I know you and I, this is Holly, we had also chatted about trying to keep the treasurer more involved as we're getting information back from the closeout and the actual final budget, that might provide more oversight than maybe we're seeing with some of the actual event leaders who aren't as diligent on the financial side.
And so I want to see them pulled in at the beginning. I want them to have a sign-off that says, I
Exactly.
reviewed this proposal.
That's going to work great for established sections.
Right.
But we come back to that same issue with international. And
But that's not an issue if we do what we discussed, and so we may as well we have basically thrown our hands up and decided to tee international back up to the board and say, what do you want to do with international? What is your strategy with international? Do you want us to pay for? Do you want PDG to fund outreach? What happens when we have events that cost 10 times more than an event would cost in the United States? Is that still prudent that we award funding to that type of an event? And we certainly don't feel comfortable about it, so if you want to do it, we recommend you do special project and get funding from the Senate to do that. Not to say that we are reluctant to do international. Obviously, I included that chart that we sent out and that shows the kind of, how could we do it internationally and still have have some control over it. And I think that if it was a special project, I don't know if it would be administered through PDG or if it would be administered separately, but that would be the prerogative of the board to decide if that's how it was done. The biggest issues we have to deal with are how can we be the most equitable to all of our members with what we provide, and how can we have the biggest reach with the dollars that we're spending? So
I have
what
a
is
question
going
as
to...
well, Mary.
Yes, yes.
Are any of you familiar with how affiliates have been set up overseas?
No, so help share a little bit of that with us.
I'm
Yeah,
asking
I
the
am.
question because
I
don't
just read
know
it
the
today.
answer. Okay, go ahead.
You don't even have to be a SWE member to be part of an affiliate.
oh,
Okay, well, here's the thing I'm wondering about. If we're sending money, where are we sending it? Our sections all have bank accounts. So
Right.
do affiliates have bank accounts?
No.
They don't have bank accounts. How are we sending them money?
Sending it to a person.
That's just a practical question.
Well,
Yeah,
today,
you just
today
send it as a reimbursement.
Today, it depends on the affiliate, I think, and that's, again, where you start getting into the sticky wicket is with, especially in areas of the world that are less ethical than other areas of the world and how they spend funding. And so I think that's,
Well, I mean,
you know,
I'm
I
not
think
sure
that
that
having
the
that-
bank account question.
but the big issue to us has always been the fiscal oversight, with international not having any fiscal oversight, and thus the responsibility falling to the PDG committee to have that fiscal oversight. And we are not prepared to do that, especially if the volume was to go up any more than it already is at 2 a year. We just aren't prepared to do that. We can't do that and know how to do that for every country in the world and do it well.
Well, I think that's why we need to talk to the board or whomever about.
But if we take it
is.
out of, let's just say we say it should be corporate partners can participate and affiliates and whoever else, then we take it out of the realm of PDG in some respects, or we have to have that discussion with the Corporate Partners Council about everybody spending ExxonMobil's money and how that's going to end up being equitable, because they'll start pissing and moaning about it in a heartbeat. You know, that this is PDG funding, I don't want to do it. And I think we're going to see more singular corporations sponsoring events over there than you're going to see groups of corporations like you might see at some events here.
Yeah, well, you know that there. I don't know what the number is, but we don't have every company represented overseas. You've got your numbers of companies that, you know, have a strong presence, like in India, a strong presence in Europe, or what have you. But that's going to be a small subset of corporate partners, whether or not they're CPC or not. It's going to be a small subset of corporate partners. So if that group of people, group of companies has decided to support SWE internationally, then the meetings they're having now overseas will help to develop some of that.
Mm-hmm.
I think you're absolutely right in having the discussion with the board and finding out their thoughts on how we integrate PDG with this initiative.
Mm-hmm.
The questions have been out there since 2011 at least, because of Florence in Nigeria.
Yes.
And just trying to find out, you know, how do we work with international entities? There was we gave a grant a couple years ago to a group in India, and nothing happened because there was nowhere to send the money.
Yeah.
I mean, really, that's all it came down, and it was like $150, but we had nowhere to send it.
Yeah.
So clearly there's a lot of concerns in this international space, and I was on the call last night when we talked about it as well. But should we focus the rest of tonight's call on thinking about how we can make other improvements for the rest of the grant request while we go forward with the request that we're going to make to the board about the international side?
I agree, Holly. I think, you know, one of the things that I wanted to be able to walk away with tonight, and I really didn't know how many people would participate in it, but I think key people are on the phone, is how are we going to share the work next year, and what are we thinking about in terms of how to make it easier, how to make it more efficient, because I expect we will have at least as many opportunities to review and to use volunteer resources to help administer these applications, and we really need to find a way to do that with fewer people, because fewer and fewer people sign up to help out. And so rather than have resources burn out, we need to find a way to do it more efficiently so that if we get 3 sets of eyes on something, that is suitable. If, you know, that there are ways to do it that don't take as much time perhaps as we've been forced to take over the last couple of years.
One idea that I have that may be a little radical, and I would really like everyone's feedback on, is maybe we need to kind of reverse engineer what we've been doing. So I'm new to the committee this past year, but I've listened into all of our conference calls and participated. And we spend a lot of time, you know, analyzing information that the various project leads have sent to us of whether or not it fits within our criteria of categories of what we'll fund for food or per person or whatever. Maybe we need to reverse engineer it and have them enter in, you know, the number of students that are at the event or the number of professionals, and we compute for them instead what we would give them.
Yep.
So we kind of reverse it rather than them requesting it. We say, this is how much you get based on the people
Right.
trying to be there.
That's an interesting approach.
Yeah, that
That's
is
an
an interesting approach.
I'm sorry?
That's an interesting approach, yeah.
So it might simplify, you know, because what do we spend all our time on? It's trying to interpret what they've given us and understand, well, how many of these were volunteers and how much of the meals was for the volunteers or versus the students, and, you know, how much was for the professional members. And this way you can kind of control, like, what those categories are that you're going to fund.
Right.
And how much you would fund based on certain units. So it might simplify things, just a thought.
Ladies, I'll be
Hey,
back
Holly,
in a second.
that's a good input.
All right, Lester. Yeah, it definitely might simplify things. The
one hardship I see with it is if somebody has something very unique we haven't seen before, you know, it may make it more difficult for them to submit a proposal that, you know, meets their needs. But even if you could get 2/3 of these proposals to kind of hit that kind of a reverse engineered criteria, maybe then you reduce how many you actually have to spend a lot of time discussing.
So if they told you they
Good
were
input.
doing a proposal with 100 girls and 100 parents or educators, and it was going to be a 6-hour event, you could basically spit back and say, here's how much money you're going to get.
Exactly. And maybe they still have to provide the description of the hands-on experiments or the description of the speaker, but that way it could all be on an online form and it just tells them what they can get, and then they have to think about that and say, oh, okay, the committee would fund me $1,500. Does that work with the rest of our funding we have available? Would that cover everything we need to do, or do we need to seek outside funding? You know, they kind of an instant feedback in a way of whether or not they're going to be able to make this thing work, rather than asking us for some unrealistic amount for printing and travel and all sorts of things we never want to fund anyway. So that's just my observation.
And there will always be that person that will game the system. There will always be that person that will figure out how to game the system. So you got to love it, though. You got to love it. I agree. I think we make it as easy as possible, as clearly defined. You put pop-ups in to tell people, oh, you're going to have a professional speaker? Well, you can pay him this, or you can do this, or you can do this. But if they're this, then you can't do this. So, but you need to tell them and then allow them to make the selection that they want to make.
Right. We could figure out, you know, maybe our most couple of, you know, whatever our most couple of criteria that we keep debating, like, well, I know we're always talking about costs of consumables and things, but, you know, if it was outreach, you know, maybe it's like a, you know, matrix where it's, you know, cost per girl, time of hands-on activities spent, and, you know, you've got, you know, so you go down, you know, I've got this many girls, you go across, I'm spending this many hours on hands-on activities, and you find whatever your rate is, you know, like you do prices on, you know, airline tickets or whatever, and maybe you're doing professional development and you go, I've got this many attendees and we're spending this many hours on professional development, so I can pay, you know,
Right.
$4,000 for a speaker.
And, you know, my guess is we have enough data. We just have to mine it. It's not easily mineable. Maybe to look at those types of costs that you could say, all right, here's the range we're going to set this up for. And that those are your operating conditions in terms of...
It's meal costs, it's t-shirt costs, it's all those things that we look at regularly that we already have known ranges for.
Right.
And that way, if somebody wants to splurge on their particular event, well, they can.
So all they have to do is check the box and say, we want t-shirts. Okay, we know what that cost is. Here's what we'll allocate for you for that cost, but that also gets included in this cost. So I think that's...
What I kind of like about this is it's very equitable across all the sections as well. Because that way, if you have a person who's maybe not as skilled writing the grants, they may not know what the norms are to ask for, versus somebody who's written, you know, San Diego section's written 1 billion of these grants. They know exactly how to, you know, get the maximum value out of what we're asking for.
Yeah, that's great, Julie. That is great input. Holly, sorry.
So the question still remains. Our experience to date has been the cost structure with doing projects internationally is different than the cost structure domestically. So do we, when you say it's equitable, it may not be equitable because...
Well, I think a point here is that if we could standardize the U.S.-based stuff, like... Holly's given a great suggestion for that, so that is not absorbing so much of the committee's time. Yes. Then we could spend more time assessing this international space, right, where we may have to develop some expertise or some priorities or some whatever, and you know, have more time and energy to focus ourselves on getting the part where we can get to a standard, which is what Holly's articulated here is let's just work off of kind of a standard work process for U.S.-based activity.
And then you could always
and that's great input. Thank you, Holly.
One of your inputs could be, is this an international proposal? And then you have some different standards that you apply once we figure out what those standards might be.
Right. So if you go through and you ask a series of questions, and those series of questions narrow down what it is that they're doing, and then you get down to some distinct areas where you might differ between PD and outreach, for instance, such as what's your content, what is it that you're going to do here, but you still ask for the same types of information. What is it you plan on teaching, or what do you learn, and how are you going to do that? You're going to have a speaker? Oh, you're going to have a speaker? Okay, tell us more about the speaker. And rather than having a kind of a generic form that they just start writing stuff that we have to then glean our information out of.
Exactly. It makes it easier for us to review them consistently because we're asking the same questions in the same way and trying to apply those standards from the very beginning rather than them giving us disparate data and then we're trying to fit it into our mold.
Right. Right.
Can we go back to the other document?
Yeah, 15 minutes left, FYI, just so you know. Yep.
Yeah. Personally, I would like to request more professional development activities in the sections, and I'm wondering what do the sections see as barriers to conducting more professional development events? Because, you know, I think one thing that we have seen, at least at the CPC level, is we get students interested in engineering, they go to college and graduate, then we have a retention problem when they get to be professionals.
Hi, this is Erin Winnick. I'm one of the collegiate RCRs for next year, and in talking to some of the other collegiate presidents, I know that a lot of them just perceive the PDG committee as a way to get funding for outreach and don't even think of it as a source for professional development.
Okay, there's one reason. Thank you.
I would agree with that, Erin. That's been the perception in our region as well for a long time, and we're just kind of breaking through that now.
So, Erin, I have a question for you. Do you perceive that doing professional development at the collegiate level is a lot different than doing professional development at the professional level?
Well, yeah, I think a lot of the events that would be held would be a lot different, but I think one big thing that can be done is collaboration between professional and collegiate sections with those events. It's just a little bit harder to encourage in that sort of area.
And is that typically because of geographical removal, or is it just because of not really knowing who to connect with?
It's a combination of the two, and combination of trying to work student schedules in with professional schedules. Like for us, we don't have any, I'm in Gainesville, Florida, and we don't have any professional sections within 2 hours of us. So.
Right, that's a challenge. Definitely a challenge. If they're nearby, it's a whole lot easier to do that.
Yeah, I know the Colorado section, or well, I know they're called the Colorado section, but they're in Denver, and sometimes they'll do something with some of the Denver universities.
Also, maybe what we could do,
Yeah,
you know, if we talk about this PDG score kind of concept in terms of evaluating at the end of a project how well they did on the whole process, that could be something that we give them extra points for if they do a joint collegiate professional development event. That,
right,
you know, that could get them more points than if they do it just by themselves. Then we'd have to think about what we want to take points away for. It's like, oh God, no, don't do that. No recruiting, that gets points away. So, you know, and maybe you come up with a minimum score and say this is, in order for it even to be considered, it has to be here. And it's not there, so it's no longer eligible because you're not even there. No SWE members. No, SWE is not aware of this being submitted. No finance report. No whatever. And it just comes down to, you know, your score is really bad. We're going to give it back to you. You need to work on these areas, and then you can resubmit it. But we're not going to waste our time on it. The system tells them that, or you have it systematically tell them that. Great idea, Holly. Is this something you can do?
Well, I certainly would be happy to try to come up with some of the key questions I think we need to ask and the standards to apply. I would need some help on exactly how we want to get that in front of the people to submit the information, you know, the best way to do that from a technology perspective.
Yeah, so I've already started taking a swag at that. I'm going to send it out to you, Holly. I'm going to send it out to, I believe right now we're talking to both Andrea and Vera about leading the pre-review team. I've got with Vera helping us focus or work through a lot of our international, if to some extent we expect a little bit of growth next year due to We Europe, and also some other hints we've been getting that there may be some activity that involves SWE outside of the United States. So you know, international is not going to go away, and we need to make sure that we have a focused team that can spend some time looking at the total project for international. So Vera will focus on the total aspect from the front end to the back end of a project, from pre-review or submittal all the way through closeout, and figuring out what it is that we're doing and what it is that we think we need to be doing. And she'll work with Barb Haney, who is going to be focusing on overall process, trying to help us define whether we need a procedure. As I mentioned earlier, the Finance Committee didn't have a procedure, and they had to put a procedure in place because it involves money. This involves money. And it involves having to make awards of funds, and Lester can attest to how challenging that is sometimes to maintain an objective viewpoint about the fact that this is money. There was a time 7 or 8 years ago that PDG funding, we were begging for people to ask for money. At this point in time, I'm not saying that we're to the point where we need to cut back on it, but we need to be very judicious and prudent in how we spend the money that our donor, ExxonMobil, provides. And that's our job as the Program Development Grant Committee, besides making it easier for everybody to apply for those funds and for those of us who are evaluating them to do that evaluation. So, Nancy, are you new? Tell me a little bit about you. This is Mary.
This is my first year on the PDG committee, and I'm a recent grad from college. I was the Regency RCR last year, and I just wanted to join the PDG committee because I've had a lot of experience when I was in college applying for grants.
That's good, because you have some personal experience that you can apply to it and say, this really stinks the way that we do this, or, you know, I never could quite figure out why you asked for that information because we never look at it when we evaluate proposals. So, and I do think that. Say that again, Holly.
Nancy could be our tester of our new process.
There we go.
Sure.
There we go. Nancy and Aaron both. So I guess for those of us on the call and for the people that may be listening to this after the call ends, we do want to focus on improving the process. We do want to focus on making the process equitable for everybody, whether you are a section, a member at large, somebody in the international community, but we also want to make sure that we are prudently spending our donors' money, and that nobody can question whether we have a conflict of interest or any kind of issue associated with funding something. And if there are fiscal concerns, then that potentially is a deal breaker. So I think that it's something that warrants close attention and some deep thought on what it is that we want to do. And that's why we need the leadership from the board to tell us what it is that strategically SWE would like to do that they want us to help facilitate.
I can answer a couple of questions though, Mary.
Yep.
Some of the information is used for the board reports. Some of the information is used for our annual reports. So just being able to say that, you know, we gave X number of dollars away for X number of grants is okay, but when you want to drill down to have a little more impact, and that's part of what the marketing team has been looking at, how we can have better impact with the information we have.
Yep.
So you want to have that impact, because if you can talk about impacting X number of K through 12 girls, you know, to get them
Right.
interested in engineering,
Right.
I think that it almost
It does
makes
have
the
impact.
money irrelevant.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? I'm not
Absolutely.
saying the money is irrelevant,
Sure.
but it does lessen the focus on dollars and puts the focus on individuals, which are, you know, our impact is supposed to be on individuals as
Right.
an organization.
Right. I agree, and I think that that's a metric. You know, nobody's saying we're going to take it out, and we're certainly not going to take it out on my watch, because I do think it's relevant. But some of the other things that we collect data on, I'm not so certain are relevant.
Okay.
And so I think that the needing to know that we're going to continue to focus on what SWE's mission is, which is to helping females become engineers and then continue to advance through engineering and on and on and on. Nancy and Aaron, Holly also, I mean, Jennifer and Lester and I have been obviously pretty involved with this for a while. Are there things that you would like to, or questions you want to ask about PDG while we've got minutes left here?
Mary, this is Holly. I guess one other thing that I've been trying to get my mind wrapped around is out on our Dropbox, there's a lot of other folders out there with previous PDG yearly committee information in them. And as a new person on this committee this year, it was a little confusing to me to try to figure out where all the latest information was at.
Yep.
So maybe if we want to set up a future call and you could spend a little time kind of walking us through what's out there for historical information. I just don't even know exactly what's really there that's current or not current.
Good question. Good question.
I can bring it up real quick to show you down and dirty where things are. If you open up the PDG folder, you'll see that everything's numbered sequentially. Then you've got the year right there. So you've got February, March of 2015, April, May of 2015. So that's where the latest grants that we're reviewing are held.
So the internal docs folder is the one in here that I'm not really sure what's all in there.
Right, that one should have contacts in it, etc. And you know what? I need to go through with Jennifer and clean this out because I happen to be one of those people that periodically, I'm an unusual person, I hear, in that I periodically actually empty folders and stuff. Online. Yeah, I seriously do. And so people are like, no, really? And yes, really, I do. So I think
there's some versions of things out there, and again, I think it makes it more streamlined.
It is a little bit confusing. We probably need to set up a fiscal year 16. Yeah, we still have fiscal year 14 stuff.
And then when people like open multiple copies, it will like save multiple copies.
Yes, correct. Yeah. That is one of the issues with Dropbox. Now, I will suggest this. We're getting to the end of the call here, but Randy's going to sit down with me, and I don't know if he's already done so with you, Lester, and talk a little bit about an app called Teamwork. We
had a presentation a couple months ago.
Okay, so he's going to sit down with me because I'm still somewhat involved with outreach through Invented Build It and some other things, and he's going to help get me a little bit more facile at using it, and to see if maybe that's a place that we could consider temporarily housing stuff while we figure out what the longer-term solution is that's going to take some of the what I call busy work, some of the grunt work and the administrivia stuff out of it, so we don't have to worry about that. Comments, questions?
I liked it when I saw it, and my first thought was that this would be really great for PDG.
Even if it's just the internal stuff.
Yeah, well, at first internally, but in terms of some of the applications for sections that are trying to submit grants. So it might even fit with your longer term goal of setting up this these processes for the sections. So once you and Randy have your meeting and you get a hands-on, we could put our heads together and figure some things out.
Yeah, so, as a minimum, I was figuring it would be a good place for us to keep our internal stuff so that it's strictly limited to the people on the committee. Some of the other stuff, such as, things we want the sections to be able to access, I don't necessarily want them to be able to access our internal documents.
No, and I don't think that's necessarily a piece of that. I think there's going to be a way to keep things separate. But
Right.
I'll let Randy, because
Yeah.
you give permissions for certain things,
Right.
which is part of that whole dynamic. So,
Yep.
but I'll let you and Randy have your meeting.
All right,
and
we'll
then
close on that. We'll close on that. Anything anybody else has to share? I'm going to try and do this a couple times a year, so over the next year. Summertime is probably, we're going to have more discussion than we would have during the regular course of the year, because during that time of the year, we're going to be focused on reviewing bids, reviewing proposals. The rest of the time is when that's really when we have the time to do some stuff. If you know some people that you think might want to help out, that are either good systems type people that like to do write programs on their own and do funny stuff like that, let us know. Let's get them involved. They can work in the background. They don't have to go out and review bids, etc., other than to understand what it is we're asking for. But we can use all the help that we can get to understand, how we can take some of this work out and make it. Ooh, Jack Welch would be proud of me, wouldn't he? Goodness. Okay, people, thank you so much for joining in, and I will try and send just some high-level discussion out about what we talked about.
Thank you, Mary.
Thanks for joining.
All right, Mary, have a good one.
Thanks so much.
Bye.